Hey, what is up guys, I'm KBHD here, and the Galaxy S has been Samsung's flagship smartphone for the past few years, and each version improves a bit on the previous version, of course. So this year we get this, the Samsung Galaxy S6, and not only is it of course the best Galaxy S yet, it's actually one of the best smartphones out there, period, in several ways. So of course, being a flagship high-end smartphone, it's on top of the spec game, it's rocking the latest internals, so the Exynos 7420, an octa-core 64-bit processor, a Mali GPU, 3GB of RAM, and up to 128 gigs of non-expandable storage. A lot of people wish it was expandable, but this is the first Galaxy S that doesn't have a micro SD card slot and doesn't have a removable battery. And this is because of the brand new design. So the new build is the biggest change from the Galaxy S5, and honestly from a lot of other flagships too. It actually reminds me a lot of the Nexus 4 again, where it's glass on the front and on the back, and chamfered metal sides. And this phone is thin, really thin, just 6.8 millimeters, so it really does need a place to hold it, so the metal is what you're going to be gripping most of the time, and metal feels great in the hand. We've learned that from other flagships like the One M9 and the Moto X, so the Galaxy S6 is no exception, and the glass on the front and back sort of curves down right around the edges of the phone, so it's not as sharp as something like the Note 4 was, and it won't catch onto hairs or anything. So it's really easy to drag your fingers across the edges, and overall it's just a really solid feeling phone in the hand. Button placement is also on point. It's very clicky and tactile. You got the power button on the right and the volume buttons on the left, and you have your headphone jack and a pretty decently loud speaker on the bottom. Better than rear-facing, but obviously not as good as front-facing speakers. And yes, the bottom of the Galaxy S6 looks just like the bottom of the iPhone 6. Quick, which one is which? Exactly. But whatever, it's still a great spot for everything, and Samsung nailed it with the chamfered metal. But it's not perfect though. Thanks to its glass front and back and the relatively curved sides, Galaxy S6 probably falls into top 5 slipperiest phones of all time. I've actually had it literally slide out of my pocket while I'm sitting down and almost slide off of a table when it was resting on a slightly tilted binder. And of course, since it's a glossy glass like that from the Nexus 4, the back of this phone is a fingerprint magnet in literally every color, probably the fastest I've ever wanted to skin on the back of my phone. Anyway, around the front, at first glance, it looks pretty much like any previous Samsung device. The shape is the same and the layout, as you can see, is the same as well. But there are a few improvements here. Number one is the home button. It's a much improved home button on the Galaxy S5 because first of all, it's much clickier and more tactile and more satisfying to press. And number two, the fingerprint reader in it is much better. It's no longer requiring a full swipe of your finger to read it, but just a touch, like a Touch ID on the iPhone. So you touch to unlock, and for this reason, it's much faster at unlocking your phone. And so for those of you who like to use fingerprint for security, this is going to make you very happy. I still turned it off after a bit because for me, it never quite got my finger right on the first try. It kept telling me to try again to get my whole finger over the button. Maybe a different finger would have worked better, or even recalibrating it, but either way, it is a big improvement over the Galaxy S5. And this new home button also serves as a double tap shortcut to quickly get into the camera, which I'll talk about later. And it sits between the capacitive multitasking and back buttons. The one thing about the capacitive buttons that I objectively think is sort of bad is you can't control how long they stay lit anymore. For some reason that setting is gone, so they'll always be on for like a full second before they turn off. And also you can't control the brightness of them, so if you're in a dark room and you have your screen brightness all the way down, you'll still get blinded by the surprisingly bright capacitive buttons at the bottom of the phone. So I kind of wish they had that setting back where I could at least have them not light up at all or turn off very quickly. As of right now, the only way to make that happen is with a third-party app. Come on, Sammy. Either way, the other impressive improvement up front is the display. This is the best screen on any smartphone, hands down. It's big, it's bright, and it's beautiful. It's a 5.1-inch display, so not too huge, especially with thin enough bezels to make this phone narrower than the Galaxy S5. And it's rocking a 2560 by 1440 resolution, so Quad HD. It is super crispy, and it's also a Super AMOLED display in typical Samsung fashion, so colors are vivid and saturated and really impressive to pretty much any eye. And it gets crazy bright too, so it's very visible outdoors, which is not something every smartphone can say, and that's very impressive for an OLED display. And there are a couple of settings to tone down the contrast or saturation if you're not feeling it, but overall, this is where Samsung does their best work, and it's no surprise that this screen is so ridiculous. Almost looks like paper here at 577 pixels per inch. Really impressive stuff. And of course, pushing all the pixels around is no joke, but the hardware is only half the story. You also got to consider the software on top of Android here. TouchWiz. Now, when Samsung first introduced me and a couple of other people to this phone, they mentioned that they were going to minimize the bloatware and essentially promised that this would be the lightest version of TouchWiz yet. And if you remember previous Samsung phones and previous reviews of Samsung phones, we've talked about the fact that TouchWiz is a heavy, slow skin. Performance has been a problem with it in the past, and it's just slowed down the experience of using Android. That is no longer the case with TouchWiz finally here. Now, it still is this big, bright, blocky, colorful thing. The aesthetics, unfortunately, I think are not improved as much as the performance is, but this is a really fast phone now. Just everything about moving around this phone now is buttery smooth, and it's held up to day-to-day use great for me with pretty much zero lag, which is impressive. Opening and closing apps was fast, and actually the multitasking menu is the fastest I've ever used in any phone. And the phone handles multitasking like a champ, even adding that dual window feature from the Galaxy Note line. Of course, 3 GB of RAM also helps a lot, although I do kind of find it hard to tell the difference between phones with 2 gigs and 3 gigs of RAM, but either way, this thing is snappy. Now, TouchWiz overall is still a design change too, so the skin kind of still has a face only its mother could love, but at least it's a bit less offensive than previous versions. That keyboard, for example, I really like. It's probably my favorite and easiest to use of any Android skin. And other updates have really made this version of TouchWiz the cleanest yet. So you can change, for example, the size of your home screen grid to have one of 3 different sizes, depending on how dense you want your icons to be. You can go in and out and use whatever theme you want. There's a theme engine, so you can have the ability to totally change the looks of everything in TouchWiz, from the notifications to the quick settings and everything, in just a few clicks. And even the gallery, which used to be the most painfully slow app on any Samsung phone, is now caught up. It launches at a normal rate. So, of course, it's not all greatness. For one, I don't really know why S-Voice is still a thing. It keeps prompting me to use it, and I just don't want to use it. We have Google everywhere. And stuff like the briefing page to the far left of your home screens, it's a little better than last year, but it's still kind of slow. It still lags when trying to swipe out of it. Now, it's obviously still TouchWiz, so there's no way around the skinned nature of Android 5.0 here, but you win some, you lose some. I've become willing to let a lot of the minor stuff go, though, because this phone has been so consistently fast, like I said, in the user experience that it's pretty dope, beyond the way, some of the icons might look. I can grab a custom launcher, I can grab a custom keyboard, a custom icon pack, a theme. I can really make this my own, and it'll still be crazy fast. I mean, the camera opens in literally under a second, for crying out loud. You can just double tap the camera button, and it's basically already open. Actually, I had this happen in my pocket a few times, and as a result, I've got plenty of pictures of the inside of my pocket. But you know what? Let's talk about the camera. Let's talk about those pictures. The Galaxy S6 is rocking a 16 megapixel sensor with a maximum f1.9 aperture with optical image stabilization and 4K video and LED flash. Damn, okay, so it looks great on paper. How does it actually perform? Well, I kind of ranted about this on Twitter for a second, but the Galaxy S6 is packing the best camera in any Android smartphone, period. And it's good enough for me to say it's tied for the best overall camera experience of any smartphone alongside the iPhone 6 Plus. I even give it the edge because it can shoot stabilized 4K video. As far as just pointing and shooting, this camera is very fast, and taking a photo is quick, and the layout is much simpler than past years, which is actually nice. It's pretty clean now. So for the most part, I left it in auto mode, and it handled itself well. I was able to point and shoot at basically anything and get crispy pictures, but once in a while I went into what's called the Pro mode, which gives you a bunch more manual controls, which will be more familiar to people who are into photography, who have used a DSLR. I could change to manual focus, manual exposure, pretty much manual everything except for shutter speed. And I basically stayed between those two modes to take all my photos on the Galaxy S6. And the photos, as you can see, look pretty great. I thought it was weird that Samsung went with a 16:9 image at 16 megapixels, but okay. The images, the photos you see are crispy as hell. Beautifully detailed stuff here, even when the camera biases towards opening the lens wide open at f1.9. You can get a nice creamy background, depth of field. The colors are, of course, your typical Samsung, saturated and vivid. And the dynamic range is actually not bad here either. A couple of times you'll notice it biased towards overexposing just a little, so it does like to expose a bit hot, and that becomes more obvious when you take low light shots, which is really the only place I could get the images from this camera to look bad. It tries to brighten things up a little bit too much, and then the image processing can't quite save it. But otherwise, it's pretty much in any conditions great. I just walk up to a subject, double tap the home button, open the camera, and then snap a quick photo and leave. And that's what makes this camera so great, is pretty much all the photos I'm showing are just the first try. In 4 seconds flat, I would take the image and be done. Now, of course, you can sit around and tweak with other camera settings and stand there for a minute while you try to get it just right and then claim, yeah, it's totally capable of making the same picture. But for a normal person, this is exactly what you want in a smartphone camera. Just point and click and make beautiful images. Super easy. The most inconsistent part of the Galaxy S6 experience for me has been the battery life. So it is a slightly smaller and now non-removable battery, so there's no switching out the batteries. And that's just to get the phone a little bit thinner. I've talked about how I want thicker batteries and bigger phones in the past, but that's okay. This is what we have now. And I was coming off of reviewing the HTC One M9, which, as I mentioned in that review, had a pretty good battery life. And with the exception of one day, I never killed the phone after a regular day of medium to heavy usage. With this phone, I had a much bigger spread. So I had some days where I was ending the day with 30% battery left, which was great. And other days where I'd be dead by 4 p.m., or it would die in my pocket and I wouldn't know because I didn't get any notifications for a while until I checked and realized it was dead. This phone has a really big spread and at the end of the day didn't really have all that great battery life. Now, I did mention this in another phone review with a similar problem, the Nexus 6, and that made up for it for me by having wireless charging and fast charging. And the Galaxy S6 does the same thing. So you can use Qi wireless charging to put this phone on any wireless charger and charge up and have random Qi chargers all over your place. Or you can just use a fast charger, so if you get home or have a chance to pop it on a quick charge somewhere during the course of your day, you won't have to worry as it'll just blast. I think it'll add 50% of your battery in 15 minutes or something absurd like that. So that sort of makes up for it for me, but I would still much rather prefer to have a larger battery and a slightly thicker phone to not have to worry about charging at all. My screen on time varied somewhere between 3 to 3.5 hours, and again, this is different for everyone's usage, but for me, I guess for comparison, something like the OnePlus One, which was a fantastic battery life, was getting for me between 4.5 to 5 hours of screen on time, and something like the One M9, even though it didn't give me a number, I would estimate gave me between 3.5 and 4 hours. So if I rated this battery life, it would be something like a C+, but the fact that you can quick charge it or wireless charge it anywhere will make up for that for some people. So at the end of the day, Samsung has come up with a pretty damn impressive package in the Galaxy S6. And there's also the Galaxy S6 Edge, which I'll have a video coming up about soon. So thumbs up if you're excited to see that. But so far, best camera in any Android smartphone, best screen in any smartphone, really impressive build. If you can get around the fact that this is still TouchWiz and it's much better than the last version, this is going to be an awesome phone, and it's something I'm definitely going to be recommending to people switching from other phones or upgrading or even sidestepping from something like a Windows phone or an iPhone. This is an awesome phone. Good job, Samsung. Looking forward to the next, I guess the Note 5 is what I'm really pumped about seeing this year. That's been it. Thank you for watching. Feel free to hit that thumbs up button below if you enjoyed, and also that subscribe button. Feel free to tap that if you haven't already. Again, thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Peace.